The Apache helicopter shuddered violently as another RPG whistled past the cockpit, close enough that Hailey Grant could smell the acrid smoke through her oxygen mask. Her hands moved with practiced precision across the flight controls, but sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool October air 8,000 feet above the Afghan mountains. "Viper 6, this is Apache 7-1, she spoke into her helmet mic, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around her aircraft. "We have multiple hostiles converging on your position. I count at least 30 tangos moving up the ridgeline." Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The radio crackled with static before the desperate voice of Marine Captain Rodriguez came through. "Apache 7-1, we're pinned down hard. They've got us surrounded and we're taking heavy casualties. We need immediate fire support or we're not making it out of here." Hailey's co-pilot and weapons systems officer, Chief Warrant Officer Marcus "Tank" Thompson, was already acquiring targets through the target acquisition and designation site. "I've got visual on the primary threat," he reported. "Looks like they've set up a mortar position on the north face. That's where those big rounds are coming from." Through her night vision display, Hailey could see the muzzle flashes from dozens of enemy positions scattered across the mountainous terrain. Below them, the small Marine reconnaissance unit was trapped in a shallow depression, their only cover a few scattered boulders and the wreckage of their damaged Humvee. She'd been in similar situations during her time as a Navy SEAL, and she knew they had minutes at most before the enemy would overrun the Marines' position. "Tank, how's our fuel looking?" she asked while executing a sharp banking turn to avoid another incoming rocket-propelled grenade. 23 minutes of combat time remaining, he replied, his fingers dancing over the weapons control panel. "But at this rate of engagement, we're going to be Winchester on ammunition in about 15. Hailey's mind raced through tactical calculations she'd learned in both SEAL training and flight school. The mathematics of modern warfare, fuel consumption, rates, ammunition expenditure, enemy movement patterns, and the brutal reality that 30 Marines were about to die if she couldn't find a way to extract them from this killing field. "Apache 7-1, be advised we have additional aircraft inbound," came the voice of their air traffic controller back at Forward Operating Base Chapman. "Apache 7-2 and 7-3 are approximately 12 minutes out from your position." 12 minutes in combat, that might as well be 12 hours. "Copy that, Chapman Control," Hailey responded while she brought the Apache into a steep dive toward the enemy positions. "We're going to try something unconventional." "Hailey, what are you thinking?" Tank asked, though his tone suggested he already knew she was about to attempt something that would either save the Marines or get them all killed. "Remember that training exercise at Fort Rucker? The one where Instructor Kowalski said we were too aggressive and nearly got us washed out of flight school?" She toggled her weapon systems to manual control and began targeting the mortar position. That was raining death down on the trapped Marines. "Oh hell no," Tank muttered. "You're not seriously considering the kamikaze run technique. Sometimes the textbook gets people killed, Tank. Those Marines down there don't have time for us to play it safe." Hailey's voice carried the same steel that had gotten her through Hell Week during SEAL training, through the grueling months of flight school, and through the dozen combat missions that had brought her to this moment, hovering between life and death above the Hindu Kush Mountains. She pushed the Apache into an almost vertical dive, the aircraft's twin turboshaft engines screaming as they accelerated toward the enemy positions at nearly 200 miles per hour. The altimeter numbers spun downward like a slot machine from hell. 6,000 feet, 5,500. 5,00. Tank was calling out altitude warnings, but Hailey's entire focus was on the targeting reticule in her heads-up display. At this angle and speed, they would have exactly one chance to eliminate the mortar position before they'd have to pull out of the dive or become a crater in the Afghan mountainside. 4,000 feet, 3,500, 3,000. Firing, she announced, and the Apache's 30mm M230 chain gun erupted in a thunderous burst that sent 800 rounds downrange in less than 4 seconds. The explosive destruction of the enemy mortar position sent a fireball into the night sky, illuminating the craggy mountain peaks in brilliant orange and red. Hailey pulled the Apache out of its death dive with barely 500 feet to spare, the aircraft's airframe groaning under the extreme G-forces as she leveled off, and began searching for her next targets. "Holy shit, Grant!" Tank's voice carried a mixture of admiration and terror. "Remind me never to play poker with you." "Viper 6, this is Apache 7-1, Hailey called to the Marines below. "Mortar threat is neutralized. We're working on clearing your extraction route now." "Apache 7-1, this is Viper 6 actual," came the voice of Captain Rodriguez. "Clearer now without the constant explosion of incoming mortar rounds." "Outstanding work. We've got wounded that need immediate medical attention. Can you clear a landing zone for our dust-off?" Hailey surveyed the terrain through her night vision systems. The area was a tactical nightmare. Steep rocky slopes limited flat ground and enemy fighters who now knew exactly where the Marines were located. Conventional wisdom would suggest waiting for additional air support before attempting a rescue operation in such hostile territory. But conventional wisdom hadn't gotten her through Navy SEAL training at age 19, hadn't made her one of only 12 women to successfully complete the program, and hadn't earned her the Navy Cross for actions during a classified operation in Syria 3 years earlier. Conventional wisdom was a luxury that dead Marines couldn't afford. "Tank, I need you to identify every hostile position within 500 meters of that Marine unit," she ordered while banking the Apache to begin another attack run. "We're going to clear them a highway to heaven." Her story had begun 2 years earlier, though it felt like a lifetime ago now. Hailey Grant had been 26 years old, a decorated Navy SEAL with 4 combat deployments, and a record that should have guaranteed her another decade of special operations assignments. Then came the morning that changed everything. She'd been leading a reconnaissance mission near the Syrian border when an improvised explosive device destroyed their convoy's lead vehicle. In the chaos that followed, with 3 wounded teammates and enemy forces closing in on their position, Hailey had made the decision that would eventually lead her to this Apache cockpit above Afghanistan. Rather than call for extraction and risk exposing their position to additional enemy forces, she'd used her training in close air support coordination to guide an Army Apache helicopter through a precision strike that eliminated the threat. But it was what happened next that had captured the attention of her commanding officers. The Apache's co-pilot had been wounded by small arms fire during the engagement, leaving the pilot unable to effectively operate both flight controls and weapon systems. Without hesitation, Hailey had volunteered to be winched up to the aircraft, where she'd taken over weapons systems operation, despite having no formal training on Apache systems. Using her knowledge of similar systems from her SEAL training and her natural aptitude for complex mechanical operations, she'd successfully guided the pilot through the destruction of 2 additional enemy positions while coordinating the safe extraction of her team. The entire engagement had been recorded by the Apache's onboard systems, and within a week, Hailey was being interviewed by Army Aviation Command about her interest in transitioning to helicopter operations. "You know, Grant," her commanding officer, Captain Sarah Mitchell, had said during one of those interviews, "the Navy's going to hate losing a SEAL of your caliber. But I think you might have found your true calling." Hailey had initially resisted the idea. She'd spent 8 years building her career as a special operations soldier, earning respect in a field traditionally dominated by men, through sheer competence and an absolute refusal to accept anything less than perfection from herself. The idea of starting over in a new military specialty Felt like abandoning everything she'd worked to achieve. But there was something about the precision and power of helicopter operations that appealed to her tactical mind. In many ways, flying an Apache was similar to leading a SEAL team. It required the same combination of technical expertise, situational awareness, and split-second decision-making under extreme pressure. The difference was that instead of managing a team of 8 operators, she'd be managing a flying weapons platform capable of engaging multiple targets simultaneously across vast distances. The transition process had been grueling. First came 6 months of intensive flight training at Fort Rucker, Alabama, where she'd learned to pilot everything from basic training helicopters to advanced attack aircraft. The physical demands were different from SEAL training, but no less challenging. Hours of maintaining precise control while experiencing disorienting G-forces, learning to interpret multiple data streams simultaneously, and developing the muscle memory required to operate complex weapons systems while flying at high speeds in hostile environments. Her instructors had been skeptical at first. Chief Warrant Officer 5 Michael Kowalski, a 30-year Army veteran with over 4,000 combat flight hours, had made no secret of his belief that Navy SEALs were glory-seeking cowboys who lacked the discipline required for helicopter operations. "This isn't about kicking indoors and shooting bad guys," he'd told her during their first flight training session. "This is about precision, patience, and understanding that one mistake doesn't just get you killed, it gets your crew killed and potentially puts dozens of ground troops in danger. SEALs think they're invincible. Pilots know they're mortal." Hailey had accepted the challenge with the same determination that had gotten her through Hell Week. She'd studied aircraft systems manuals until she could recite technical specifications from memory, practiced flight simulations until her hands moved across control panels without conscious thought, and pushed herself through every training scenario with a focus on perfection rather than just competency. The breakthrough had come during her 4th month of training, during a complex leave fire exercise designed to test her ability to coordinate with ground troops while engaging multiple targets in a simulated urban environment. The scenario was intentionally designed to overwhelm new pilots. Too many targets, too little time, too many variables to track simultaneously. Hailey had approached the exercise like she would approach a SEAL mission, by breaking down the complex situation into manageable components, prioritizing threats based on their immediate danger to friendly forces, and executing each engagement with methodical precision. Rather than trying to engage all targets simultaneously, she'd systematically eliminated threats in order of priority while maintaining constant communication with ground forces. The result had been a nearly perfect score and the grudging respect of Chief Kowalski. "Well, I'll be damned," he'd said after reviewing her performance. "Maybe some SEALs can learn to fly after all." But earning her pilot's wings had been only the beginning of Hailey's transformation. The real challenge had come during her assignment to the 1st Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment, the first attack at Fort Hood, Texas. Here she'd learned to work as part of an Apache crew with Tank Thompson, a 15-year Army veteran, who'd initially been less than enthusiastic about being paired with a SEAL experiment. Tank was everything Hailey wasn't: methodical where she was aggressive, cautious where she was bold, content to follow established procedures where she was inclined to improvise. Their first few months flying together had been a series of professional conflicts disguised as tactical discussions. "You can't just dive bomb every enemy position you see," Tank had argued after a particularly heated debriefing session. "We've got protocols for a reason. We work with other aircraft, coordinate with ground controllers, follow engagement rules that keep everyone alive. And while we're following protocols, Marines die," Hailey had countered. "Sometimes the situation requires adaptive thinking. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to save lives. There's a difference between calculated risks and suicide runs," Tank had replied. "You're going to get us both killed." Their professional relationship had gradually evolved as they'd learned to balance Hailey's aggressive tactical instincts with Tank's systematic approach to weapon systems management. Tank had come to appreciate her ability to read battlefield situations and make split-second tactical decisions, while Hailey had learned to value his methodical approach to target acquisition and weapons employment. The partnership had been tested during their deployment to Afghanistan, where they'd flown 37 combat missions over the past 6 months. Each mission had taught them something new about working together, about the capabilities and limitations of their aircraft, and about the deadly serious business of close air support for ground troops in contact with enemy forces. Now, hovering in the darkness above another group of Americans in desperate need of help, all of that training and experience was being put to its ultimate test. The tactical situation was clear: 30 Marines trapped by at least 50 enemy fighters, limited ammunition and fuel, and no immediate prospect of additional support. "Tank, talk to me about target priorities," Hailey said while she maneuvered the Apache to avoid a stream of tracer fire from a machine gun position on a nearby ridge. "I'm seeing 3 primary threat clusters," he reported, his voice calm and professional despite the bullets cracking past their aircraft. "Heavy machine gun position at your 2 o'clock, approximately 400 meters from the Marines. RPG team moving up the south slope at your 10 o'clock. And there's what looks like a technical pickup truck with a mounted heavy weapon trying to flank around to the east." "Rules of engagement?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Danger close for all targets. Marines are requesting immediate suppression of all hostile forces." Danger close meant that their targets were within 600 meters of friendly forces, close enough that a targeting error or malfunctioning weapon could kill the people they were trying to save. It was the kind of situation that demanded absolute precision under extreme pressure. Hailey took a deep breath and felt the familiar calm that had always come to her in moments of crisis. Whether she was leading a SEAL team through a hostile village or piloting an Apache through a mountain valley filled with enemy fighters, there was something about life or death situations that brought absolute clarity to her thinking. "Engaging the machine gun position first," she announced, and guided the Apache into position for a Hellfire missile strike. "After that, we'll work the RPG team with the chain gun, then swing around to intercept the technical." The Hellfire missile streaked away from their aircraft with a brilliant flash, its contrail visible in the night vision displays as it guided itself toward the enemy machine gun position. 3 seconds later, the mountainside erupted in flame and debris, eliminating the immediate threat to the trapped Marines. "Direct hit," Tank reported, switching to gun systems for the RPG team. Hailey banked the Apache into position for a strafing run, bringing their 30mm chain gun to bear on the enemy fighters, who were attempting to maneuver into position for a rocket-propelled grenade attack. The gun's distinctive buzzing roar filled the cockpit as it sent a stream of explosive rounds into the rocky slope, each impact creating a small explosion of rock and flame. "RPG team is neutralized," Tank announced, "but I'm tracking additional movement on the north slope. Looks like they're bringing up reinforcements." Through her night vision display, Hailey could see more enemy fighters moving through the rocky terrain, their heat signatures clearly visible against the cold mountain air. They were attempting to establish new firing positions that would allow them to attack the Marines from multiple directions simultaneously. "Viper 6, this is Apache 7-1, she called to the Marine unit. "We're seeing additional hostiles moving to flank your position. You need to be ready to move as soon as we clear your extraction route." "Copy that, Apache 7-1, came Captain Rodriguez's reply. "We're ready to move on your command. Our wounded are prepped for transport, but we're going to need covering fire all the way to the landing zone." The landing zone was a small flat area, approximately 800 meters northeast of the Marines' current position, far enough to provide some separation from enemy forces, but close enough that wounded Marines could be carried there without vehicles. The problem was the route. It led directly through a narrow valley that was perfectly situated for an ambush. "Tank, how are we doing on ammunition?" Hailey asked while she positioned the Apache to engage the technical vehicle that was still attempting to flank around to the east. 8 Hellfires remaining, approximately 400 rounds of 30 mil, he reported. "But we've got another problem. I'm getting low fuel pressure warnings on the number 2 engine." Hailey's blood ran cold. Engine trouble in a combat zone was every pilot's nightmare, especially when they were the only thing standing between friendly forces and annihilation. She quickly scanned her engine instruments and confirmed Tank's assessment. Fuel pressure on their starboard engine was dropping, indicating either a fuel leak or a problem with the engine's fuel system. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Hard to say. Could be 5 minutes, could be 20. But if that engine quits, we're going to have significantly reduced performance." An Apache helicopter could fly on one engine, but its ability to hover, maneuver, and carry weapons loads was severely compromised. More importantly, if they lost the engine entirely while engaged in combat operations, their chances of making it back to base would be minimal. "Options?" Hailey asked while she fired their remaining Hellfires at the technical vehicle, eliminating it in a spectacular explosion that lit up the entire valley. "We could withdraw now, try to make it back to Chapman while we still have both engines," Tank suggested, though his tone made it clear he already knew what her response would be. "And leave 30 Marines to die? Not happening." Hailey's voice carried the same finality that had characterized her decision-making during 8 years as a Navy SEAL. "We finish this mission. Then we better make every round count," Tank replied. And she could hear him adjusting his weapon systems for maximum efficiency. The sound of additional aircraft was becoming audible over the noise of their own rotors. Apache 7-2 and 7-3 were finally approaching the area. But even with reinforcements inbound, the immediate tactical situation remained critical. Enemy forces were repositioning for a final assault on the Marine position, and there was no guarantee that additional air support would arrive in time to prevent a massacre. "Apache 7-1, this is Apache 7-2, came the voice of Major Patricia Hawk Martinez, their flight leader and one of the most experienced combat pilots in the regiment. "We're 5 minutes out from your position. What's your status?" 7-2. "We have 30 Marines pinned down and taking heavy casualties," Hailey reported while she engaged another group of enemy fighters with their chain gun. "Multiple hostile positions, approximately 50 to 60 combatants. We're running low on ammunition and have engine trouble, but we're maintaining close air support until you arrive." "Copy that, 7-1. We're coming in hot and heavy. Try to stay airborne for another few minutes." 5 minutes. In her experience, Marines under fire measured their lives in seconds, not minutes. But Hailey had learned during her years as a SEAL that sometimes the impossible was simply what needed to be done, regardless of the odds. "Tank, plot me a course that takes us directly over the enemy positions between the Marines and their extraction route," she ordered. "We're going to clear them a corridor." "Hailey, we don't have enough ammunition for a sustained engagement," Tank warned. "And if that engine quits while we're in a hover, then we'll autoritate into the mountainside like heroes instead of cowards," she replied, her voice carrying the same steel that had gotten her through the most difficult moments of her military career. "Those Marines came here to fight for their country. The least we can do is be willing to die for them." Tank was quiet for a moment. Then she heard him making adjustments to their weapon systems. "All right then," he said finally. "Let's go save some Marines." The Apache descended into the valley like a mechanized angel of death, its chain gun creating a continuous stream of explosive rounds that carved a path of destruction through the enemy positions. Hailey flew the aircraft with a precision that bordered on the supernatural, weaving between rocky outcroppings and dodging incoming fire while Tank systematically eliminated every enemy fighter who posed a threat to the trapped Marines. Below them, she could see the Marines beginning their movement toward the extraction point, carrying their wounded comrades while maintaining defensive formations despite their desperate circumstances. They moved with the practiced efficiency of professional soldiers who understood that their survival depended on trusting the two people in the Apache helicopter that was currently drawing fire from every enemy position in the valley. Apache 7-1. "This is Viper 6, came Captain Rodriguez's voice over the radio. "We're moving to extraction. Your covering fire is outstanding. We can see the landing zone." "Roger that, Viper 6, Hailey replied while she brought the Apache around for another strafing run. "Keep moving. We'll keep the bad guys' heads down." But as she completed the turn, the aircraft shuddered and she heard the unmistakable sound of turbine blades striking metal. Warning lights flooded her instrument panel as the number 2 engine began an emergency shutdown sequence. "We just lost the starboard engine," Tank announced, his voice tight with controlled fear. "And I'm showing damage to the main rotor system." Hailey felt the Apache's flight characteristics change immediately. The aircraft became sluggish in its responses, requiring more power and more careful control inputs to maintain stable flight. Worse, their ability to hover or perform aggressive maneuvering was now severely limited. "Can we make it back to base?" Tank asked Dot through her night vision display. Hailey could see the Marines were still 400 meters from the landing zone, and enemy fighters were beginning to reposition for attacks on the exposed unit. Apache 7-2 and 7-3 were still 3 minutes away, an eternity when measured in the lives of soldiers under fire. "Negative," she replied, and began bringing the damaged Apache around for one final attack run. "We finish this mission first." The damaged Apache helicopter responded like a wounded animal as Hailey fought to maintain control with only one functioning engine. Every maneuver now required careful calculation of power management and weight distribution, while the constant vibration from the damaged rotor system made precise targeting nearly impossible. "Apache 7-2, this is 7-1, she called to the approaching aircraft. "Be advised, we have major mechanical damage and are operating on single-engine power. Request you expedite your arrival." "Copy, 7-1, Major Martinez replied. "We're pushing maximum speed. Can you maintain position for 2 more minutes?" Below them, the Marines were still moving toward the extraction point, but enemy fire was intensifying as more fighters moved into position. Hailey could see muzzle flashes erupting from at least a dozen locations throughout the rocky terrain, creating a deadly crossfire that the Marines would have to navigate to reach safety. "Tank, how much ammunition do we have left?" she asked while struggling to keep the Apache in position for effective fire support. 60 rounds of 30 mil, no missiles," he reported grimly. "And our targeting system is degraded due to the rotor vibration. Accuracy is going to be significantly reduced." 60 rounds. In normal circumstances, that would be enough for perhaps 30 seconds of sustained fire. But with their damaged aircraft and compromised targeting systems, Hailey knew they would need to make every single round count. "Viper 6, this is Apache 7-1. She called to the Marines below. "We're running low on ammunition and have significant aircraft damage. You need to move fast once we begin our final suppression run." "Roger that, Apache 7-1, Captain Rodriguez replied. "We're 200 meters from extraction. Just keep their heads down for another minute. 1 minute." Hailey had learned during her years as a Navy SEAL that 60 seconds could feel like an hour when people were shooting at you, or it could pass in the blink of an eye when you needed more time to complete a mission. Right now, with 30 Marines counting on her to keep them alive, every second felt precious beyond measure. She brought the Apache into position for their final strafing run, fighting against the aircraft's damaged flight controls, while Tank prepared their remaining ammunition for maximum effect. The plan was simple. Use their last 60 rounds to create enough suppression fire that the Marines could reach the landing zone without taking casualties. Engaging, she announced, and opened fire with the 30mm chain gun, even with the targeting. System degraded. Tank's experience as a weapons systems operator allowed him to walk the explosive rounds across the enemy positions with devastating accuracy. Each impact created a small explosion of rock and dirt that forced enemy fighters to seek cover instead of maintaining their fire on the exposed Marines. 50 rounds, 40, 30. Marines are at the landing zone, Tank announced. There, setting up defensive positions and treating wounded. 20 rounds, 15, 10. The chain gun fell silent, leaving only the sound of the Apache's remaining engine and the damaged rotor system. They were now effectively defenseless, operating a flying target with no offensive capabilities and severely reduced flight performance. Apache 7-1, this is 7-2, came Major Martinez's voice over the radio. We have visual on your position and are beginning our attack run. Suggest you clear the area immediately. Hailey was already bringing the Apache around to withdraw from the combat zone when she heard Tank's sharp intake of breath through the intercom. Hailey, we've got a problem. Big problem. Through her night vision display, she could see what Tank was referring to. A group of enemy fighters had managed to position themselves on a ridge overlooking the Marine landing zone, and they were setting up what appeared to be a heavy machine gun that would have a clear field of fire on the extraction point. 7-2, be advised there's a heavy weapons team on the ridge at your 2 o'clock. She called to the incoming Apache helicopters. They have overwatch on the Marine position. We see them, 7-1, Major Martinez replied. But we're still 90 seconds from weapons range. 90 seconds. The Marines were completely exposed on the small landing zone, and once that heavy machine gun opened fire, they would be trapped in a killing field with no cover and no escape. The incoming Apache helicopters were too far away to engage the threat, and her own aircraft was out of ammunition and barely flyable. Tank, do we have any options? She asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Negative on weapons. We're Winchester on everything. Tank paused, and she could hear him checking their systems. But ... But what? We still have a $20 million helicopter with about 2,000 pounds of fuel on board, he said. Quietly, and that machine gun position is on a narrow ledge. Hailey understood immediately what Tank was suggesting. It was the kind of desperate measure that military historians would either call heroic or insane, depending on whether it worked. Use their damaged Apache as a guided missile to eliminate the threat that was about to massacre 30 Marines. Tank, if we do this, we're not walking away, she said matter-of-factly. I know, he replied, but those Marines have families too. And they're counting on us. Through her night vision display, Hailey could see the enemy fighters completing their setup of the heavy machine gun. In another few seconds, they would begin firing on the exposed Marines, and nothing the incoming Apache helicopters could do would stop the slaughter. She thought about her own life, 28 years old, no family beyond her military brothers and sisters, a career built on the principle of putting mission and teammates ahead of personal safety. She thought about the Marines below, some probably younger than she was, all of them depending on her to make the right decision in this moment. 7-2, this is 7-1, she called to Major Martinez. We're going to eliminate the machine gun position. Continue your approach and provide close air support for Marine extraction. 7-1, what are you planning? Came the Major's voice, though her tone suggested she already suspected what Hailey intended. We're going to ram the position, Hailey replied calmly. It's the only way to neutralize the threat before they can engage the Marines. Negative 7-1, that's a suicide run. Wait for us to get into weapons range. Marines don't have 90 "Seconds," Hailey replied, and began bringing the Apache around for its final approach. "Tell my commanding officer that we completed the mission." She felt Tank's hand briefly touch her shoulder through the seatback, a gesture of solidarity that needed no words. They had trained together, flown together, and now they would die together in service to the Marines who needed them to succeed. The damaged Apache accelerated toward the machine gun position with its remaining engine at full power, the aircraft vibrating violently as its damaged rotor system struggled to maintain. Lift. Through her heads-up display, Hailey could see the enemy fighters realizing what was happening, some of them abandoning their weapon and attempting to flee from the narrow ledge dot at the last second, as the Apache closed the final 100 meters. To impact, Hailey heard a familiar sound that made her heart leap with hope, the distinctive roar of Apache helicopters opening fire with their full weapons load. She looked up to see Apache 7-2 and 7-3 diving toward their position, both aircraft firing Hellfire missiles at maximum rate. The first missile struck the machine gun position, a split second before the Apache would have impacted, creating a massive explosion that destroyed the enemy position and blasted debris across the mountainside. The second and third missiles struck additional enemy positions, eliminating the remaining threats to the Marines at the landing zone. 7-1, pull up, pull up. Major Martinez was shouting over the radio. Hailey hauled back on the flight controls, using every ounce of power from their remaining engine to arrest the Apache's dive. The aircraft responded sluggishly, its damaged systems protesting as she demanded performance it was no longer capable of providing. She could feel the helicopter shuddering as it approached its operational limits, threatening to break apart or enter an unrecoverable stall, but somehow impossibly. The Apache leveled off just 50 feet above the rocky mountainside, its skids nearly touching the ground as Hailey managed to pull out of what should have been a fatal dive. The aircraft was barely controllable, wallowing through the air like a wounded bird, but they were alive. "Holy hell, Grant!" Tank's voice came through the intercom, shaky with adrenaline and relief. "I thought we were both going to meet our maker." "On that one." "Apache 7-1, this is 7-2, came Major Martinez's voice. "Outstanding flying, what's your status?" Hailey quickly scanned her instruments, though she already knew the answer wasn't good. Warning lights covered every system panel. The remaining engine was showing signs of stress from being pushed beyond its limits, and the aircraft's flight controls were becoming increasingly unresponsive. 7-2, we have major system failures. "Across the board," she reported. "Single engine, damaged rotor system, degraded flight controls. We're going to need immediate assistance getting back to base." "Roger that, 7-1. We'll escort you home. But first, let's get these Marines extracted." Over the next 20 minutes, Hailey watched as Apache 7-2 and 7-3 provided cover for the medical evacuation helicopters that arrived to extract the wounded Marines. The entire rescue operation proceeded smoothly now that the immediate enemy threat had been eliminated, and soon all 30 Marines were safely aboard aircraft, heading back to Forward Operating Base Chapman. Viper 6 to Apache 7-1 came Captain Rodriguez's voice as his medical evacuation helicopter departed the area. "I don't know what your names are, but you just saved the lives of 30 United States Marines. We won't forget what you did here tonight." "Just doing our job, Viper 6, Hailey replied, though she felt a deep satisfaction at knowing they had succeeded in their mission. "Get your wounded back to medical care." The flight back to FOB Chapman took 45 minutes that felt like hours as Hailey struggled to keep the damaged Apache airborne. Tank had calculated their fuel consumption against their remaining engine performance and determined they would arrive with less than 5 minutes of fuel remaining, assuming their engine didn't quit entirely during the flight. Major Martinez and her wingmen flanked their damaged aircraft, ready to provide assistance if needed, while air traffic control cleared all other aircraft from their flight path and prepared emergency services for their arrival. It was the kind of attention that reflected both the seriousness of their situation and the importance of what they had accomplished. 7-1, this is Chapman Tower, came the voice of their air traffic controller as they approached the forward operating base. Emergency services are standing by. Wind is calm. You're cleared for immediate landing on any available spot. Hailey could see the base's runway lights ahead, along with the flashing red and white lights of emergency vehicles positioned around the landing area. After 6 months of combat operations, Phoebe Chapman felt like home, and she was determined to get tanks safely on the ground, even if it meant pushing their damaged aircraft beyond its limits. The Apache touched down with a jarring impact that reflected its damaged landing gear, but they were safely on the ground with their engines still running. As soon as the rotor blades stopped spinning, maintenance crews swarmed the aircraft while medics checked both crew members for injuries. Grant Thompson, Major Martinez approached as they climbed out of their aircraft. That was some of the finest flying and weapons work I've seen in 20 years of combat operations. You saved a lot of lives tonight. Hailey looked back at their Apache helicopter, which was surrounded by maintenance personnel documenting the extensive damage. The aircraft would need weeks of repairs before it could return to service, assuming it could be repaired at all. But 30 Marines were alive who might have died without their intervention. "Ma'am, we were just doing what any crew would do in that situation," Hailey replied, though she knew that wasn't entirely true. Most crews would have withdrawn when they lost their engine, following standard operating procedures that prioritized aircraft preservation over mission completion. "The hell they would," Tank interjected, still shaky from their near-death experience. "I've been flying for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone attempt a kamikaze run with a damaged aircraft to save ground troops." Major Martinez studied Hailey with the calculating gaze of an experienced combat leader. "Grant, you've been with us for 6 months now, and every mission report mentions your unconventional approach to tactical problems. Your SEAL background shows, but not always in ways that make your commanding officers comfortable." Hailey felt a familiar sinking sensation. Throughout her military career, she'd walked a fine line between innovative tactical thinking and insubordination. Her methods got results, but they also made senior officers nervous about her willingness to follow established procedures. "Ma'am, if my performance has been unsatisfactory, your performance has been exceptional," the Major interrupted. "That's what makes this conversation necessary. Colonel Harrison wants to see you in his office at 0800 tomorrow. Something about a new assignment." As Hailey walked across the base toward her quarters, she couldn't shake the feeling that her career was about to change dramatically once again. In her experience, conversations with senior officers about new assignments usually meant either promotion or punishment, and given her tendency to bend rules in favor of mission success, she wasn't certain which to expect. The temporary quarters she shared with 3 other female pilots was quiet when she entered. Her roommates were either flying night missions or already asleep, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the adrenaline crash that always followed intense combat operations. She sat on her narrow bunk and pulled out her secure satellite phone to send a brief message to her former SEAL team leader, now Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, who was stationed at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. "Completed another interesting mission today. Starting to think the Navy trained me too well for my own good. Hope you're staying safe out there." Morrison's reply came back within minutes. "Despite the time difference, heard through the grapevine that you're making quite an impression with the Army. Try not to start any wars single-handedly. Call me when you can talk freely." Jake Morrison had been more than just her commanding officer during her time with SEAL Team 7. He'd been a mentor, friend, and one of the few people who truly understood her approach to leadership under pressure. His advice had guided her through some of the most difficult decisions of her military career, and she trusted his judgment more than almost anyone else's. But right now, halfway around the world and facing an uncertain future with Army aviation. Jake felt very far away. She was on her own in a military culture that was still adjusting to having women in combat roles, trying to prove herself worthy of trust and responsibility while staying true to the aggressive leadership style that had made her successful as a Navy SEAL. The next morning arrived with the brutal efficiency of military life. Hailey was awake at 0530, dressed and ready for the day by 0600, and standing outside Colonel Harrison's office at 0750. Punctuality was one of those military virtues that transcended service branches. And she'd learned long ago that being early was often more important than being right. Colonel Thomas Harrison was a career Army officer with 32 years of service, including 4 combat deployments and command of 2 different aviation units. His office walls were covered with photographs from various assignments around the world, unit citations, and the accumulated memorabilia of a life spent in service to his country. "Chief Warrant Officer Grant," he said as she entered his office and rendered a crisp salute. "Please have a seat. We need to discuss your future with this unit." Hailey sat in the chair across from his desk, maintaining the alertness that came naturally to someone who'd spent years in high-stakes military environments. Colonel Harrison had always struck her as fair but demanding, the kind of officer who expected excellence and wasn't particularly interested in excuses when it wasn't delivered. "Sir, if this is about my methods during last night's mission, your methods saved 30 Marines," the colonel interrupted. "But they also nearly got you and Chief Thompson killed, and they certainly destroyed a $20 million aircraft. That puts me in an interesting position as your commanding officer." He pulled out a thick folder that Hailey recognized as her personnel file, complete with performance evaluations, training records, and incident reports from her 6 months with the unit. The folder was considerably thicker than it should have been for someone with her length of service, which usually wasn't a good sign. "Grant, in 6 months you've flown 37 combat missions, received 2 air medals for valor, and generated more incident reports than some pilots accumulate in entire careers," Colonel Harrison continued. "Your tactical innovation is remarkable, your flying skills are exceptional, and your willingness to take risks to save ground troops is exactly what we need in a combat pilot." Hailey waited for the "but" that she knew was coming. "But your disregard for standard operating procedures and your tendency to make unilateral tactical decisions are causing problems up the chain of command. Last night's mission is being reviewed by 3 different general officers who want to understand why one of my pilots attempted a suicide attack against enemy positions. Sir, the tactical situation required immediate action. Standard procedures would have resulted in Marine casualties. I understand that, and frankly, I agree with your assessment. But the Army is a large organization, and large organizations require predictable procedures that can be applied consistently across different units and different situations. Your approach works for you because you have exceptional training and experience, but it's not scalable to the average pilot." Colonel Harrison opened her personnel file and pulled out several documents that appeared to be official correspondence. "That brings me to why I asked you here. You have some options for your future career path, and I wanted to discuss them before you make any decisions. Sir, Option 1, you can remain with this unit, accept additional oversight of your tactical decision-making, and continue flying combat missions under more restrictive rules of engagement. This would allow you to complete your current deployment and transition back to Navy control at the end of your Army assignment." Hailey could read between the lines. Option 1 meant accepting that her aggressive tactical style was unwelcome, and that future missions would be conducted under the close supervision of officers who didn't trust her judgment. It was a professional death sentence that would effectively end her career in combat aviation. Option 2, you can accept assignment to the Army's Combat Applications Group, where your unconventional approach to tactical problems would be considered an asset rather than a liability. This would require extending your assignment with the Army and accepting a permanent transfer from Navy control. The Combat Applications Group, commonly known as Delta Force, was the Army's premier special operations unit, roughly equivalent to the Navy SEALs in terms of mission scope and operational requirements. Assignment to Delta Force would mean returning to the special operations community that had originally shaped her military career, but it would also mean leaving aviation behind. "Sir, what's option 3? Hailey asked, sensing there was something else the colonel hadn't mentioned. Colonel Harrison smiled for the first time during their conversation. "Option 3 is the reason I really asked you here. Are you familiar with the Army's 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment? The 160th SOAR, the Night Stalkers, were the Army's elite helicopter unit, specializing in special operations missions that required precisely the kind of aggressive, innovative flying that had gotten Hailey in trouble with conventional aviation units. They flew deep penetration missions, hostage rescues, and high-value target operations that demanded both exceptional piloting skills and the ability to make split-second, tactical decisions under extreme pressure. "Sir, I'm familiar with their reputation," she replied carefully. "They're looking for experienced pilots with special operations backgrounds for a new program they're developing. Something about advanced training methods for close air support in special operations environments. The details are classified, but I can tell you that they specifically requested pilots with both SEAL experience and demonstrated expertise in high-risk tactical aviation." Hailey felt her pulse quicken. Assignment to the 160th SOAR would represent the perfect combination of her special operations background and her aviation skills, working with a unit that specifically valued the kind of aggressive tactical thinking that made conventional commanders nervous. "What would be required for option 3, she asked. 6 months of advanced training at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, followed by assignment to an operational squadron within the 160th. It would mean leaving Afghanistan immediately and extending your Army assignment indefinitely, with the possibility of eventual permanent transfer if both you and the Army agree. Sir, may I have some time to consider these options?" "You have 24 hours, Colonel Harrison replied. "But Grant, before you decide, I want you to understand something. Your performance with this unit has been exceptional by any measure. You've saved lives, completed impossible missions, and demonstrated exactly the kind of courage and skill that makes America's military the finest in the world. Don't let anyone convince you that your methods are wrong just because they make people uncomfortable." As Hailey left the colonel's office, her mind was racing through the implications of each option. Staying with her current unit under increased supervision would effectively end her career in meaningful aviation roles. Transferring to Delta Force would mean abandoning aviation altogether, returning to ground-based special operations that no longer challenged her the way flying did. But the 160th SOAR represented something entirely different, a chance to combine her special operations experience with her passion for aviation in a unit that specifically valued innovative tactical thinking. It would mean starting over yet again, learning new procedures and proving herself to another group of skeptical commanders, but it would also mean working with the most elite helicopter pilots in the world. She spent the rest of the day talking to Tank and other members of their unit, trying to understand the full implications of each choice. Tank, predictably, encouraged her to follow her instincts. "Hailey, I've flown with a lot of pilots over the years," he said as they sat in the base's small dining facility. "Most of them are technically competent, some of them are tactically sound, but very few of them have that combination of skill and balls that it takes to pull off the impossible. You do. Don't waste that in a unit that's going to make you fly by a checklist." That evening, she called Jake Morrison on the secure satellite phone, explaining the situation and asking for his perspective on her options. This is going to sound strange coming from a Navy officer, Jake said after listening to her description of the three choices. But I think you should go with the 160th. You were always too aggressive for conventional SEAL operations, too willing to take risks. That made your superiors nervous. But that's exactly what Special Operations Aviation needs. Pilots who can think outside the box when the situation demands it. You think I should leave the Navy permanently? I think you should follow your strengths wherever they lead you. The Navy will always be part of who you are, but your future might be with the Army. Besides, Jake added with a laugh she could hear despite the satellite delay, someone needs to show those Army pilots how a real operator handles a helicopter. 24 hours later, Hailey was back in Colonel Harrison's office with her decision. Sir, I'd like to accept assignment to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, she said formally. I thought you might, the colonel replied with approval. Your orders are already being processed. You'll fly out on tomorrow's supply transport to Ramstein Air Base in Germany, then on to Fort Campbell. Chief Thompson will be taking over your current aircraft when it's repaired. Sir, thank you for giving me these options. Grant, you're one of the finest pilots I've had the privilege of commanding. The 160th is lucky to get you, and I suspect you're going to do remarkable things with them. Just try not to start any international incidents. As Hailey walked across Phoebe Chapman for the last time, packing her gear and saying goodbye to the friends she'd made during 6 months of combat operations, she felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that had accompanied every major transition in her military career. She was leaving behind the relative familiarity of conventional Army aviation for the unknown challenges of the most elite helicopter unit in the world. She would be tested, evaluated, and pushed to her limits by people who had dedicated their entire careers to perfecting the art of Special Operations Aviation. But for the first time since leaving the Navy SEALs, she felt like she was moving toward something that would truly challenge her abilities rather than constrain them. The 160th SOAR represented the ultimate expression of everything she'd learned about combining special operations tactics with aviation capabilities, and she was eager to discover what she could accomplish in that environment. The transport aircraft that carried her away from Afghanistan was filled with soldiers rotating home after completed deployments, many of them looking forward to reuniting with families and returning to normal lives. But Hailey wasn't going home. She was going to another training environment, another proving ground, another opportunity to push herself beyond what she'd previously thought possible. As the aircraft climbed away from the mountains of Afghanistan, she looked down at the terrain where she'd spent the last 6 months learning to balance her aggressive tactical instincts with the technical demands of combat aviation. It had been a valuable education, but she suspected it was only the beginning of what she would need to know to succeed with the Night Stalkers. Fort Campbell, Kentucky, represented a dramatic change from the austere conditions of Forward Operating Base Chapman. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment's headquarters occupied a sprawling complex of hangars, training facilities, and administrative buildings that reflected the unit's status as the Army's premier helicopter organization. Hailey's first impression of the Night Stalkers came during her initial briefing with Lieutenant Colonel Michael Reaper Davidson, the commander of 2nd Battalion, 160th SOAR. Davidson was a lean, intense officer with 25 years of special operations experience, including assignments in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and several classified operations that couldn't be discussed outside of secure facilities. Chief Warrant Officer Grant, Davidson said as she reported to his office, I've read your file, reviewed your performance evaluations, and watched the video footage from your final mission in Afghanistan. You have exactly the kind of background we're looking for, but I want to be clear about what you're getting into here. The walls of Davidson's office were covered with photographs from special operations missions around the world. Night Stalker. Helicopters landing in desert compounds, inserting special forces teams into hostile territory, and conducting precision strikes against high-value targets. It was a visual reminder that the 160th SOAR operated at a level of intensity and danger that exceeded even conventional combat aviation. Sir, I understand that the 160th has higher standards and more demanding mission requirements than conventional aviation units, Hailey replied. Higher standards, yes. But more than that, we operate under fundamentally different assumptions about risk, innovation, and mission success. Conventional aviation prioritizes aircraft preservation and crew safety. We prioritize mission accomplishment, understanding that sometimes aircraft and crews are expendable, if that's what it takes to complete critical national security objectives. Davidson pulled out a classified briefing folder marked with security classifications that Hailey hadn't seen since her time with the SEALs. The program you're being considered for is called Advanced Tactical Integration, ATI. It's designed to develop new methods for coordinating helicopter operations with Special Forces ground units in high-threat environments. Sir, what would my role be in this program? That depends on how you perform during the next 6 months of training. ATI requires pilots who can think like Special Operations ground commanders, while flying helicopters in conditions that would challenge the most experienced aviators. We need people who understand both the tactical requirements of Special Operations and the technical limitations of rotary wing aircraft. Davidson opened the briefing folder and showed her photographs of training scenarios that looked more like scenes from a war movie than conventional aviation exercises. Helicopters landing on building rooftops in urban environments, conducting insertions in mountainous terrain under simulated enemy fire, and operating in weather conditions that would normally ground all aircraft. The training is conducted in 3 phases, he continued. Phase 1 is advanced flight training. You'll learn to operate MH-60 Black Hawks and MH-47 Chinooks in conditions that push both aircraft and crew to their operational limits. Phase 2 is tactical integration. You'll work directly with Special Forces units to develop new methods for close air support and insertion extraction operations. Phase 3 is evaluation and selection for permanent assignment to an operational squadron. Sir, what's the attrition rate for this program? 60%. And that's not because people wash out due to incompetence. It's because the demands of Night Stalker operations require a very specific combination of technical skill, tactical judgment, and psychological resilience that most pilots simply don't possess. Hailey had been through selection processes before, including both Navy SEAL training and Army flight school, but she sensed that ATI would be different. Rather than testing her ability to endure physical hardship or master technical skills, it would evaluate her capacity to make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure while managing complex aircraft systems and coordinating with ground forces. Sir, when does training begin? Monday morning, 0500. You'll be working with 11 other pilots from various backgrounds, some from conventional aviation units like yourself, others from Special Operations units who are transitioning to aviation. All of them are volunteers, all of them have exceptional records, and all of them think they're the best pilot in their respective units. That weekend, Hailey explored Fort Campbell and tried to prepare mentally for what she suspected would be the most challenging training program of her military career. The base was home to both the 160th SOAR and the 101st Airborne Division, creating an environment where elite units operated side by side with conventional forces. She spent Saturday evening at the base's Officers Club, where she met several other pilots who were beginning at TI training. The group included Captain Sarah Phoenix Rodriguez, an Air Force pilot with experience in combat search and rescue, Chief Warrant Officer David Chaos Kim, a former Army Ranger who had transitioned to aviation, and Major Robert Steele Williams, a Marine Corps pilot with extensive experience in close air support operations. "So you're the SEAL who's been tearing up Afghanistan with those crazy attack runs," Phoenix said after introductions were made. "I heard about your final mission from some friends in the 227th. That was either brilliant flying or the luckiest suicide attempt in military history." "Probably a little of both," Hailey replied honestly. "But it worked, and 30 Marines went home to their families." "That's what matters," Steele added. "But I'm curious about your transition from ground-based special operations to aviation. Most SEALs I know think helicopters are just taxis that occasionally shoot things." The conversation continued for several hours, with each pilot sharing stories from their respective backgrounds and speculating about what a TI training would entail. Despite their different service branches and career paths, Hailey noticed that they all shared certain characteristics: exceptional confidence in their abilities, willingness to take calculated risks, and a deep commitment to mission success. Regardless of personal cost, Monday morning arrived with the brutal efficiency that characterized all military training programs. Hailey and her 11 fellow students reported to a nondescript building at 0500, where they were met by the AT training cadre, a group of experienced Night Stalker pilots and crew chiefs who would evaluate their performance over the next 6 months. Chief Warrant Officer 5 Marcus Blade Thompson, no relation to Tank Thompson from Afghanistan, served as the senior instructor pilot for the program. Blade had 28 years of experience with the 160th, including participation in the raid that killed Osama bin Laden, multiple hostage rescue operations, and classified missions that had earned him 3 Distinguished Flying Crosses and a Legion of Merit. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blade announced as the 12 students stood at attention in a sterile briefing room, "welcome to Advanced Tactical Integration. Over the next 6 months, we're going to determine whether you have what it takes to fly the most demanding missions in the United States military. Some of you will succeed, some of you will fail, and all of you will be pushed beyond what you previously thought possible." The briefing room walls were covered with technical diagrams of MH-60 and MH-47 helicopters, tactical scenarios that looked like they'd been designed by someone with a particularly vivid imagination, and a large banner that read, "Death Waits in the Dark," the unofficial motto of the 160th SOAR. "Your first phase of training will focus on advanced flight operations in the MH-6 Black Hawk," Blade continued. "This aircraft is significantly more capable than anything most of you have flown, but it's also more complex and more demanding. You'll learn to operate in conditions that would ground conventional aviation units: zero visibility, extreme weather, hostile fire, and mechanical emergencies that require split-second decision-making." He gestured to a series of photographs showing Night Stalker operations in various environments around the world. "More importantly, you'll learn to think like Night Stalkers. We don't just fly helicopters. We solve problems that other people consider impossible. We insert special operations teams into locations that can't be reached by any other means. We extract wounded personnel from situations where conventional medical evacuation is impossible, and we provide fire support for operations that don't officially exist." The first week of training consisted primarily of academic instruction on MH-6 systems, advanced flight techniques, and Night Stalker operational procedures. Hailey quickly discovered that everything she'd learned about helicopter operations during her time with conventional Army aviation was merely a foundation for the advanced techniques employed by the 160th Night Stalker pilots routinely flew in weather conditions that would ground commercial aviation, navigated through mountainous terrain using only infrared imaging systems, and conducted precision landings in spaces barely larger than their aircraft. They operated under the assumption that enemy forces would be actively trying to kill them, that mechanical failures were inevitable, and that mission success often depended on making decisions that conventional training would consider impossible. The difference between Night Stalker operations and conventional aviation, explained Chief Warrant Officer 3 Jennifer Viper Martinez during a briefing on low-level navigation techniques, is that conventional pilots are trained to avoid dangerous situations while we're trained to succeed in dangerous situations. We don't just tolerate risk, we manage it in ways that allow us to accomplish missions that other people consider impossible. Viper had been with the 160th for 12 years, including multiple deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. She'd participated in hostage rescue operations, high-value target raids, and classified missions that had earned her a reputation as one of the most skilled pilots in the regiment. She was also one of only 6 women currently serving as Night Stalker pilots, making her both a role model and a source of practical advice for Hailey's transition to Special Operations Aviation. "Grant," Viper said after a particularly challenging navigation exercise, "you're adapting to our procedures faster than most students, but I can see you're still thinking like a conventional pilot in some situations. You need to stop worrying about what the book says and start focusing on what the mission requires." "Ma'am, could you be more specific?" Hailey asked. "This morning's exercise, you executed a textbook approach to the landing zone, maintaining proper airspeed and descent rate throughout the entire profile. But you also took an extra 90 seconds to complete the approach. And in a real-world scenario, those 90 seconds could mean the difference between successfully extracting a Special Operations team and leaving them to be captured or killed." Viper pulled out a tablet displaying the flight data from Hailey's exercise. "Night Stalker approaches are aggressive because we operate under the assumption that we're being targeted from the moment we enter enemy airspace. We get in fast, complete the mission, and get out before enemy forces can react effectively. That requires flying techniques that push aircraft and crew to their limits. Ma'am, what would you have done differently?" "I would have maintained maximum allowable airspeed until the last possible moment, then executed a steep deceleration and landing that minimized exposure time. It's more demanding on the aircraft and crew, but it significantly reduces the window of vulnerability during insertion or extraction operations." That afternoon, Hailey practiced the aggressive approach techniques that Viper had demonstrated, learning to balance airspeed, altitude, and aircraft attitude in ways that maximize performance while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. It was a delicate dance that required precise timing and absolute confidence in both her abilities and her aircraft's capabilities. By the end of her second week at Fort Campbell, Hailey was beginning to understand the fundamental difference between conventional aviation and Night Stalker operations. Conventional pilots were trained to operate safely within established parameters, while Night Stalkers were trained to operate effectively beyond those parameters when mission requirements demanded it. The difference became even more apparent during her first live-fire exercise, conducted on a training range that simulated a hostile village environment. The scenario required her to insert a team of Special Operations soldiers into a compound while under simulated enemy fire, then provide close air support while the team conducted their mission, and finally extract them under continued hostile fire. "Remember," Blade had briefed before the exercise, "the Special Operations team is counting on you to get them in and out safely. If you fail, they don't get a second chance. If you succeed, they complete their mission and everyone goes home alive." That's the reality of Night Stalker operations. People live or die based on your performance. The exercise began at 0200 hours, with Hailey flying through simulated enemy airspace using only night vision equipment and infrared navigation systems. The training range had been configured to replicate a typical Special Operations target. A compound surrounded by multiple buildings, narrow streets that limited aircraft maneuverability, and numerous positions where enemy forces could be positioned. "Blade 7-1, this is ground element," came the voice of the Special Operations team leader through her helmet radio. "We're ready for insertion." Landing zone is marked with infrared strobes. Through her night vision display, Hailey could see the infrared markers that indicated the designated landing zone, a small courtyard barely large enough to accommodate her MH-60 Black Hawk. The approach would require threading the helicopter between multiple buildings while maintaining precise altitude control to avoid simulated power lines and other obstacles. Ground element, this is Blade 7-1, she replied while beginning her approach to the landing zone. Beginning final approach. Be ready for immediate departure from aircraft. The simulated enemy fire began immediately with training instructors, using laser systems to replicate the effects of small arms fire and rocket-propelled grenades. Warning indicators flashed on her instrument panel as the simulation systems registered hits on her aircraft, forcing her to adjust her approach while managing simulated system failures. She touched down in the courtyard with less than 5 feet of clearance on either side, holding the helicopter in a precise hover while the Special Operations team rapidly departed the aircraft. The entire insertion took less than 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity while simulated enemy fire continued to target her aircraft. Blade 7-1. This is ground element, came the team leader's voice. Insertion complete. Proceeding to objective. Request you remain on station for close air support. For the next 20 minutes, Hailey circled the compound at low altitude, using the helicopter's forward-looking infrared system to track the Special Operations team's movement and identify potential threats. When the simulation called for close air support, she engaged targets with the aircraft's simulated weapon systems while maintaining awareness of friendly force locations. Ground element, this is Blade 7-1, she called as the exercise approached. Its conclusion. Ready for extraction. What's your status? Blade 7-1, we're ready for pickup. Landing zone is secure, but we're receiving heavy fire from surrounding buildings. Request immediate extraction. The extraction approach was even more challenging than the insertion, as the simulation now included sustained enemy fire from multiple directions. Hailey had to balance the need for speed against the requirement for precision, bringing the helicopter into the narrow courtyard while simulated bullets and rocket-propelled grenades filled the air. Around her aircraft the Special Operations team members ran to the helicopter under simulated fire, diving aboard as quickly as possible while Hailey maintained the aircraft in a steady hover. As soon as the last team member was aboard, she pulled power and accelerated away from the compound, climbing and turning to avoid simulated surface-to-air missiles. Exercise complete, announced Blade over the radio as they departed the training area. Blade 7-1 returned to base for debrief. The post-exercise debriefing lasted 2 hours, with the training cadre reviewing every aspect of Hailey's performance using data recorded by the simulation systems. They analyzed her approach techniques, her response to simulated emergencies, her communication with ground forces, and her tactical decision-making throughout the exercise. Grant, Blade said as the debrief concluded, your flying was technically proficient and you successfully completed the mission requirements. But you're still flying like you're afraid of breaking the aircraft. Night Stalker operations require pilots who are willing to push their aircraft to the absolute limits of performance when the mission demands it. Sir, could you be more specific about what I need to improve? Aggressiveness. You approach every situation with caution, which is a virtue in conventional aviation, but can be a liability in special operations. Sometimes the safest approach is the most dangerous one, and sometimes the only way to save lives is to risk lives. You need to learn to make those calculations instinctively. Hailey spent that evening reviewing the exercise footage and analyzing her performance compared to demonstrations by experienced Night Stalker pilots. She could see the differences that Blade had identified. Her approaches were textbook perfect, but took longer than necessary. Her responses to simulated emergencies were technically correct but conservative, and her overall flying style prioritized Safety over mission efficiency. It was a fundamental shift in thinking that went beyond technical flying skills. During her time as a Navy SEAL, she'd learned to accept calculated risks in pursuit of mission success, but aviation training had emphasized safety and procedural compliance. Now she needed to combine the aggressive mindset of special operations with the technical precision of helicopter operations. The challenge was complicated by the fact that she was competing with 11 other exceptional pilots, each of whom brought their own strengths and backgrounds to the training program. Phoenix's experience with combat search and rescue gave her expertise in flying in adverse weather conditions, while Steele's background in close air support provided him with superior tactical awareness during complex engagements. Chaos, the former Army Ranger turned pilot, seemed to have an intuitive understanding of how ground forces operated, allowing him to anticipate their needs and provide support before it was requested. Each of her fellow students excelled in different areas, and Hailey knew she would need to find ways to distinguish herself if she wanted to complete the program successfully. The breakthrough came during her 4th week of training, during a particularly challenging exercise that required her to extract a wounded Special Operations soldier from a hostile area while under sustained enemy fire. The scenario was designed to test her ability to make split-second decisions under extreme pressure, balancing the safety of her aircraft and crew against the life of the wounded soldier. Blade 7-1, this is ground element, came the urgent voice of the team leader. We have one urgent surgical case requiring immediate medical evacuation. Landing zone is hot. We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Through her infrared display, Hailey could see the wounded soldier lying in an open area surrounded by enemy positions. The designated landing zone was under direct fire, and any helicopter attempting to land would be exposed to concentrated enemy fire for the duration of the medical evacuation. Standard procedures called for suppression of enemy positions before attempting medical evacuation in such circumstances, but the simulation included the complication that the wounded soldier was bleeding out and would die within minutes if not extracted immediately. Ground element, this is Blade 7-1. Hailey replied while studying the tactical situation. I'm going to attempt immediate extraction. Mark the patient with infrared strobe and be ready to load quickly. Rather than following conventional approach procedures, Hailey brought the helicopter in fast and low, using terrain features to mask her approach from most enemy positions. She popped up over a ridgeline directly above the wounded soldier, then executed a rapid spiral descent that minimized her exposure time while positioning the aircraft for immediate extraction. The maneuver was dangerous and would have been impossible without the enhanced capabilities of the MH-6 Black Hawk, but it allowed her to reach the wounded soldier before enemy forces could effectively target her aircraft. The extraction took less than 45 seconds from touchdown to departure, and she was climbing away from the area before enemy forces could mount a coordinated response. Outstanding flying, Grant, Blade announced over the radio as she departed. The exercise area. That's exactly the kind of innovative thinking we're looking for. The post-exercise debrief was markedly different from previous sessions, with the training cadre focusing on the tactical decision-making that had made the rapid extraction possible. Rather than criticizing her technique, they analyzed how she'd used terrain, timing, and aircraft capabilities to solve a problem that conventional procedures couldn't address. Grant, Viper said after the formal debrief, that maneuver you executed, where did you learn that? Ma'am, I didn't learn it anywhere. I analyzed the tactical situation, considered the capabilities of the aircraft, and improvised a solution that seemed most likely to succeed. That's what I thought. And that's exactly what Night Stalker operations require. Pilots who can see solutions that don't exist in any manual or training program. You're starting to think like one of us. As Hailey's training progressed through the remaining weeks of Phase 1, she found herself developing the aggressive confidence that characterized successful Night Stalker pilots. She learned to push aircraft and crew to their limits when mission requirements demanded it, to make split-second tactical decisions based on incomplete information, and to accept calculated risks that conventional training would consider unacceptable. More importantly, she learned to trust her instincts in situations where established procedures were inadequate. Night Stalker operations frequently involved unique circumstances that required innovative solutions and the ability to improvise effectively. Under pressure was often the difference between mission success and mission failure. By the end of Phase 1 training, only 8 of the original 12 students remained in the program. 2 had been eliminated due to inability to meet technical flying standards. 1 had been removed due to poor tactical judgment, and 1 had voluntarily withdrawn after deciding that Night Stalker operations exceeded his comfort level with risk. "Congratulations," Blade announced to the surviving students during their final Phase 1 briefing. "You've successfully completed advanced flight training and demonstrated the basic skills required for Night Stalker operations. But Phase 2 is where we separate the pilots from the Night Stalkers. You'll be working directly with Special Operations units on live training exercises, and your performance will determine whether you're selected for permanent assignment to the 160th. As Hailey prepared for Phase 2 of the Advanced Tactical Integration Program, she received an encrypted message that would change everything. The communication came through classified channels from Naval Special Warfare Command, marked with security classifications that immediately caught her attention. "Chief Warrant Officer Grant," the message read, "your presence is requested for a classified briefing regarding Operation Neptune Spear 2. Report to Building 7412, Room 203, Fort Campbell, at 1400 hours tomorrow. Come alone and discuss this with no one." Operation Neptune Spear had been the code name for the raid that killed Osama bin Laden in 2011. A Neptune Spear 2 suggested something of similar magnitude and sensitivity. Hailey spent a sleepless night wondering what kind of mission could require both her special operations background and her developing Night Stalker capabilities. Building 7412 was an unmarked structure on the periphery of Fort Campbell, the kind of nondescript facility that housed activities too sensitive for normal military installations. Room 203 contained a single conference table, sophisticated secure communication equipment, and 3 men in civilian clothes who introduced themselves only by first names. "Ms. Grant," said the eldest of the 3, a man called Harrison who carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of senior intelligence leadership, "what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels of national security. Your participation in this briefing means you're already considered for a mission that doesn't officially exist." Harrison activated a large display screen showing satellite imagery of a mountainous region that Hailey didn't immediately recognize. 6 weeks ago, intelligence assets confirmed the location of Khalil Ahmad Rahman, the architect of the embassy bombings in Syria and the mastermind behind 17 terrorist attacks across the Middle East and Europe. He's currently hiding in a compound in the mountains of northern Pakistan, approximately 40 miles from the Afghan border. The satellite images showed a fortified compound built into the side of a mountain, accessible only by narrow mountain paths and protected by multiple defensive positions. It was the kind of target that conventional military forces couldn't approach without triggering a massive firefight that would likely result in Rahman's escape. "Rahman has been our #1 high-value target for 3 years, continued the second man, introduced as Mitchell. "He's responsible for the deaths of over 400 civilians and military personnel, including 37 Americans. Multiple attempts to capture or kill him have failed because of his location and security arrangements." "What makes this situation different?" Hailey asked. "We have a narrow window of opportunity," Harrison replied. "Intelligence indicates that Rahman will be meeting with several other high-value targets at this compound in 2 weeks. It represents a chance to eliminate multiple terrorist leaders in a single operation, but it requires capabilities that don't exist in any single military unit. Mitchell pulled up additional imagery showing the tactical challenges of the target location. The compound is built into a cliff face, 3,000 feet above the valley floor. Conventional helicopter insertion is impossible due to altitude, weather conditions, and the limited landing areas. Ground approach would take days and would certainly be detected long before forces could reach the objective. However, Harrison continued, our analysis suggests that a highly skilled pilot flying a specially modified aircraft might be able to insert a small special operations team directly onto the compound using techniques that have never been attempted. In combat, the third man, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. Ms. Grant, your unique combination of special operations experience and advanced helicopter training makes you one of only 3 people in the entire United States military who might be capable of executing this mission. We need to know if you're willing to volunteer for an operation that has approximately a 50% chance of success and a 90% chance that you won't survive if it fails. Hailey studied the satellite imagery and tactical analysis, her mind automatically calculating approach routes, altitude requirements, and the technical challenges of inserting a team at such an elevation and in such hostile terrain. It was the kind of mission that existed at the absolute edge of what was technically possible. What would be required? She asked. Harrison pulled up detailed specifications for a heavily modified MH-6 OM Black Hawk that had been secretly developed for high altitude special operations. This aircraft has been fitted with upgraded engines, enhanced navigation systems, and armor protection specifically designed for this type of mission. It can operate at altitudes and in conditions that would ground any other helicopter, but it requires a pilot with exceptional skill and the ability to make split-second decisions under extreme pressure. The Special Operations Team would consist of 12 Navy SEALs from DEVGRU, the same unit that conducted the original Bin Laden raid, Mitchell added. They would have approximately 30 minutes to locate and eliminate all targets, gather intelligence materials, and prepare for extraction before Pakistani military forces could respond. And if Pakistani forces do respond before we can extract? Hailey asked. Then you and the SEAL team become an international incident that the United States government will disavow. Harrison replied bluntly. This mission doesn't exist, and if it fails, none of you were ever there. Hailey had volunteered for dangerous missions before, but nothing that combined such technical challenges with such significant geopolitical consequences. Success would eliminate some of the world's most dangerous terrorists, but failure could trigger an international crisis that might lead to war between nuclear powers. I need to understand the technical requirements, she said. What altitude would we be operating at? What are the weather conditions? And how would extraction be conducted? Mitchell pulled up detailed meteorological data and topographical analysis. The compound is at approximately 9,500 feet elevation, which is near the operational ceiling for any helicopter. Weather patterns show high winds, potential icing conditions, and visibility that could drop to 0 without warning. Extraction would be conducted at an alternate location, approximately 3 miles from the objective, requiring the SEAL team to move across hostile terrain while carrying wounded and captured intelligence materials. The greatest challenge, Harrison added, is that you would be operating entirely alone. No backup aircraft, no support from Pakistani forces, no possibility of rescue if something goes wrong. Once you cross into Pakistani airspace, you're committed to completing the mission or dying in the attempt. Hailey spent the next 2 hours reviewing mission details, technical specifications, and contingency plans. The operation would require flying at the absolute limits of both aircraft and pilot capability, navigating through some of the most challenging terrain in the world. and coordinating with a SEAL team under conditions that would test everyone involved. When would this mission take place? She asked. 12 days from now, Harrison replied. Which means you would need to begin specialized training immediately and complete your preparation in less than 2 weeks. Most military operations require months of planning and preparation. We have days. And if I decline to volunteer? Then the mission doesn't happen. And Khalil Ahmad Rahman continues planning terrorist attacks that will kill more innocent people. You're not just our best option, you're our only option. That evening, Hailey called Jake Morrison on a secure line from her quarters at Fort Campbell. Without revealing classified details, she described the general nature of the decision she was facing and asked for his guidance. I can't make this decision for you, Jake said after listening to her carefully worded description. But I can tell you that throughout your entire career, you've never backed down from a mission because it was dangerous. You've always chosen to take calculated risks if it meant saving lives or protecting national security. This feels different, Jake. The technical challenges alone are at the edge of what's possible, and the geopolitical consequences if it fails. Are you afraid of dying, or are you afraid of failing? The question stopped Hailey cold. She realized that her hesitation wasn't about the personal risk. She'd accepted the possibility of death in combat long ago. Her concern was about attempting something so technically demanding that failure might be inevitable despite her best efforts. I'm afraid that I'm not good enough to pull this off, she admitted. I've known you for 8 years. I've seen you do impossible things under pressure that would break most people. If the people planning this mission think you're capable of executing it, then you probably are. The question is whether you're willing to find out. The next morning, Hailey reported back to Building 7412 with her decision. I'll volunteer for the mission, she told Harrison and his team. Outstanding, Harrison replied. Your training begins immediately. You'll be working with a team of technical specialists who will teach you to operate the modified aircraft, and you'll conduct rehearsals with the SEAL team that will be executing the ground portion of the mission. The next 10 days passed in a blur of intensive preparation. Hailey learned to operate the heavily modified MH-6OM in conditions that pushed both aircraft and pilot to their absolute limits. The enhanced engines provided additional power for high-altitude operations, but they also created new challenges. In terms of fuel consumption and system management, she practiced high-altitude insertions in mountainous terrain, learned to navigate using advanced GPS systems that could operate in areas where satellite coverage was limited, and developed contingency plans for dozens of potential emergency situations. Every aspect of the mission was rehearsed repeatedly until her responses became automatic. The SEAL team she would be working with was led by Lieutenant Commander Marcus "Ghost" Peterson, a 15-year veteran of DEVIGRU with experience in some of the most sensitive special operations missions of the past decade. Ghost's team included specialists in close-quarters combat, demolitions, intelligence gathering, and medical care. All of them volunteers who understood the risks involved. Grant, Ghost told her during one of their planning sessions, my team has conducted over 200 combat missions in the past 5 years. We've never worked with a pilot who had your combination of special operations experience and technical flying skills. If anyone can get us in and out of that compound alive, it's you. The mission launch took place from a classified facility in eastern Afghanistan, using aircraft and personnel that officially didn't exist. Hailey's modified MH-6OM had been transported to the region in pieces and reassembled by a specialized maintenance team that had trained specifically for this operation. Ghost Team, this is Reaper 6, came the voice of the mission commander through her helmet radio as they prepared for departure. Weather conditions are marginal, but within acceptable parameters. Pakistani air defenses are showing normal patterns. You are cleared for launch. The flight to the target area took 2 hours, following a carefully planned route that avoided Pakistani radar installations and military bases. Hailey flew at extremely low altitude through mountain valleys, using terrain masking to avoid detection, while navigating through some of the most challenging geography in the world. Reaper 6, this is Ghost 1. Lieutenant Commander Peterson's voice came through her headset as they approached the target area. We're 15 minutes out from insertion. All team members are ready. Through her night vision display, Hailey could see the compound built into the mountainside ahead. Intelligence reports had been accurate. It was a fortress-like structure with multiple defensive positions and very limited access routes. The insertion point was a narrow ledge barely large enough to accommodate her helicopter, with sheer drops on 3 sides. Ghost 1, this is Reaper 6, she called as she began her final approach. Insertion point is visual. Be ready for immediate departure from aircraft. We can't maintain position for more than 30 seconds. The approach to the compound required flying through a narrow canyon while maintaining precise altitude, control to avoid both the canyon walls and the defensive positions surrounding the target. Hailey could see muzzle flashes from small arms fire as guards responded to their approach, but the helicopter's armor protection absorbed the incoming rounds without significant damage. She touched down on the narrow ledge with less than 3 feet of clearance on either side, holding the aircraft in a precise hover while the 12 SEAL team members rapidly departed. The entire insertion took 28 seconds, and she was climbing away from the compound before enemy forces could mount an effective response. Ghost 1, this is Reaper 6, she called as she established orbit at a safe distance from the Fizaya compound. Insertion complete. All team members accounted for. Beginning hold pattern for extraction. For the next 25 minutes, Hailey maintained position while listening to radio communications from the SEAL team as they moved through the compound. The mission was proceeding according to plan. They had successfully eliminated the primary targets, gathered intelligence materials, and were preparing to move to the extraction point. Reaper 6, this is Ghost 1. Peterson's voice came through her headset. Primary mission accomplished. We have jackpot. Repeat, we have jackpot. Move into extraction point with precious cargo. Jackpot meant they had successfully eliminated Khalil Ahmad Rahman and the other high-value targets. Precious cargo referred to captured intelligence materials that could provide information about future terrorist operations. The mission was succeeding beyond expectations, but as Hailey began her approach to the extraction point, her aircraft's warning systems detected incoming surface-to-air missiles from Pakistani military units that had responded faster than intelligence estimates had predicted. Ghost 1, this is Reaper 6, she called while executing evasive maneuvers to avoid the incoming missiles. We have company. Pakistani military is responding with heavy weapons. Extraction is going to be hot. Copy, Reaper 6, we're at the extraction point and ready for immediate pickup. The extraction point was even more challenging than the insertion. A small clearing surrounded by rocky terrain that limited her approach options. Worse, Pakistani forces were now actively engaging her aircraft with both small arms fire and guided missiles, forcing her to balance mission requirements against aircraft survival. Hailey brought the helicopter into the extraction point using an aggressive approach that minimized exposure time, but pushed the aircraft to its operational limits. The SEAL team members ran to the aircraft under fire, loading their wounded teammates and captured materials while she maintained the helicopter in position, despite sustained enemy fire. All personnel aboard, Ghost called as the last team member entered the aircraft. Get us out of here. The extraction flight was a running battle as Pakistani forces attempted to prevent their escape using fighter aircraft and surface-to-air missile systems. Hailey flew the damaged helicopter through mountain valleys at maximum speed, using terrain masking and electronic countermeasures to avoid the incoming threats. Reaper 6, this is Overlord, came the voice of the mission commander. Pakistani Air Force has scrambled F-16s to intercept. You need to reach the border before they get into missile range. The border was 35 miles away, and her damaged aircraft was struggling to maintain airspeed while carrying the full SEAL team and their equipment. Fuel levels were dropping rapidly due to combat damage, and several aircraft systems were showing failures from the sustained enemy fire. Ghost 1, we're not going to make the border with this aircraft, she announced to Peterson. We need to find an alternate extraction point where we can transfer to another aircraft. Negative, Reaper 6, Peterson replied. No other aircraft can operate in this area with Pakistani forces in pursuit. We make it to the border in this helicopter, or we don't make it at all. Hailey pushed the damaged aircraft beyond its design limits, climbing over mountain peaks while Pakistani F-16s closed the distance behind them. The helicopter was losing altitude and airspeed with each passing minute, and she knew they had only minutes before complete aircraft failure. Reaper 6, this is Overlord, came the mission commander's voice. Pakistani fighters are 5 minutes from missile range. Current speed will not get you to the border in time. Through her display screens, Hailey could see the border marked. On her navigation system, still 20 miles away and requiring her to climb over a 12,000-foot mountain peak that was near the absolute ceiling of her damaged aircraft. With full power and undamaged systems, the climb would have been challenging but possible. With battle damage and degraded performance, it appeared impossible. Ghost 1, she called to Peterson. I need you and your team to jettison everything. Non-essential. Ammunition, equipment, anything that's not critical to the mission. We need to reduce weight if we're going to make it over that peak. Roger, Reaper 6, dumping all non-essential gear now. As the SEAL team threw equipment out of the aircraft, Hailey began the climb toward the mountain peak that represented their only path to safety. The helicopter's engines screamed as she demanded maximum power, while warning systems indicated that multiple aircraft systems were operating beyond safe parameters. The Pakistani F-16s were now visible on her radar display, closing rapidly and preparing to engage with air-to-air missiles. At their current rate of closure, they would be within missile range before she could reach the mountain peak, let alone cross the border. All stations, this is Overlord, came an unexpected voice through her headset. Blue Angels are inbound to provide air cover. Maintain current heading and altitude. Blue Angels was the code name for F-22 Raptor stealth fighters that had been secretly positioned to provide emergency support if needed. Hailey could see them on her display as they engaged the Pakistani F-16s, forcing them to break off their pursuit and withdraw to avoid an international incident. With the immediate threat neutralized, Hailey was able to focus entirely on getting her damaged aircraft over the mountain peak and across the border. The helicopter crossed the summit with less than 50 feet to spare, its engines straining at maximum power and multiple systems showing critical failures. Reaper 6, this is Overlord, came the mission commander's voice as they crossed into Afghan airspace. Welcome home. Outstanding work. Mission accomplished. The emergency landing at Bagram Air Base was controlled chaos as medical teams rushed to treat wounded SEAL team members while intelligence specialists began processing the captured materials from the compound. Hailey's aircraft was damaged beyond economical repair, but everyone aboard had survived the mission. Grant, Lieutenant Commander Peterson said as they climbed out of the helicopter. I've worked with a lot of pilots over the years, but I've never seen flying like that. You saved all our lives tonight. The mission debriefing lasted 6 hours, with intelligence analysts confirming that the operation had eliminated 4 high-value terrorist targets and captured materials that would prevent multiple planned attacks. The intelligence gathered from Rahman's compound led to the disruption of terrorist cells across 3 continents. Chief Warrant Officer Grant, Harrison said during the final debrief session, this operation represents one of the most successful Special Operations missions in recent history. Your flying was nothing short of extraordinary. 3 weeks later, Hailey was back at Fort Campbell, completing her training with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The mission in Pakistan remained classified, known only to a small number of senior officers and intelligence officials, but word of her exceptional performance had spread through special operations communities. "Grant," Lieutenant Colonel Davidson called her into his office, "I've received some interesting communications about your recent activities. I can't discuss the details, but I can tell you that certain very senior people are impressed with your capabilities." "Sir, I was just doing my job." "The hell you were. What you did required skills and judgment that maybe 5 people in the entire world possess. Which brings me to why I asked you here. You have some decisions to make about your future." Davidson pulled out a series of official documents that appeared to be assignment orders and promotion recommendations. "You're being offered permanent assignment to the 160th with immediate promotion to Chief Warrant Officer 3. You would be assigned to our most elite unit, flying missions that don't officially exist for operations that never happened." "Sir, what would that involve?" "Leading the development of new special operations aviation techniques, training other pilots in high-risk insertion and extraction procedures, and flying missions that push the boundaries of what's technically possible. Essentially, becoming the person that other special operations units call when they need something impossible accomplished." Hailey looked out the window of Davidson's office at the 160th SOAR flight line, where night Stalker helicopters were preparing for training missions. It was a far cry from the conventional Army Aviation Unit where she'd started, or even the Navy SEALs where she'd begun her special operations career. "Sir, there's something I need to know. The mission in Pakistan, was that a one-time assignment? Or would there be more operations like that?" "Grant, what I'm about to tell you is classified, but you've earned the right to know. There are approximately 6 high-value targets around the world who are currently beyond the reach of conventional military operations. They're hiding in locations that are too difficult to access, too politically sensitive to attack, or too technically challenging for normal special operations units." Davidson pulled up a world map showing locations marked with red symbols. "Each of these targets represents thousands of potential casualties if they're allowed to continue their activities. Eliminating them would require pilots capable of flying missions that exist at the absolute edge of technical possibility, combined with special operations teams willing to operate under extreme risk. You're talking about creating a new type of special operations unit. I'm talking about recognizing that modern threats require capabilities that don't exist in any current military organization. We need pilots who can think like special operations ground commanders, special operations teams who understand advanced aviation capabilities, and both groups working together on missions that conventional forces consider impossible." Hailey understood what Davidson was proposing. Rather than operating within existing military structures, she would help create new capabilities specifically designed for the most challenging national security threats. It was an opportunity to shape the future of special operations while taking on missions that would test everything she'd learned throughout her military career. "Sir, if I accept this assignment, what would be expected of me?" "Excellence, innovation, the willingness to attempt missions that other people consider impossible, and the judgment to know when something truly is impossible versus merely very difficult." That evening, Hailey walked across Fort Campbell for what might be the last time. As a student pilot, she'd come here 6 months ago as a Navy SEAL transitioning to Army aviation, uncertain about her future and struggling to adapt to a new military culture. Now she was being offered the chance to help create capabilities that didn't previously exist. She thought about the Marines she'd saved in Afghanistan, the SEAL team she'd extracted from Pakistan, and the potential operations that would require the same combination of technical expertise and tactical innovation. Each mission had required her to push beyond what she'd previously thought possible, and each success had prepared her for even greater challenges. Her secure satellite phone rang as she reached her quarters. The caller identification showed it. Was Jake Morrison calling from Coronado. I just got word through unofficial channels that you've been offered something very interesting. Jake's voice came through clearly despite the encryption. I can't discuss details on this line, but I wanted you to know that whatever you decide, the Navy SEAL community will always consider you one of our own. Jake, how do you know when you're ready for something that might be beyond your capabilities? You're never ready for things that are beyond your capabilities. That's what makes them beyond your capabilities. But sometimes you have to attempt them anyway because the alternative is unacceptable. That's what leadership means in special operations. Any advice for someone who's thinking about taking on missions that don't officially exist? Yeah, sure they do exist, even if officially they don't. Someone has to be willing to take the difficult assignments, and you've spent your entire career proving that you're one of the people who can handle them. The next morning, Hailey reported to Lieutenant Colonel Davidson's office with her decision. Sir, I accept assignment to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment and volunteer for the missions you described. Outstanding, Grant. Welcome to the Night Stalkers. Your first assignment will be developing training protocols for extreme environment operations. After that ... double quotes Davidson smiled grimly. After that, we'll see just how impossible things can get. As Hailey walked toward her new assignment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from Navy SEAL to Apache pilot to Night Stalker. Each transition had required her to learn new skills, adapt to new challenges, and push herself beyond what she'd previously thought possible. The path ahead would be even more demanding, involving missions that existed at the intersection of technical innovation and tactical necessity. She would be helping to create capabilities that future special operations forces would depend on, while taking on assignments that would test everything she'd learned about leadership under pressure. But for the first time since leaving the Navy SEALs, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The combination of special operations mindset and advanced aviation capabilities represented the perfect expression of everything she'd learned throughout her military career. She was ready to discover just how far those capabilities could be. Pushed in service to national security, 6 months later, Chief Warrant Officer 3 Hailey Grant was leading a classified training program that prepared pilots for missions that officially didn't exist. Her students included some of the most experienced aviators in the military, all of them learning techniques that pushed helicopter operations beyond conventional limits. The missions she flew remained classified, but their success was measured in threats neutralized, lives saved, and capabilities developed that would serve American Special Operations Forces for decades to come. She had found her calling at the intersection of technical excellence and tactical innovation, exactly where the impossible became merely very difficult. In the end, Hailey Grant's transformation from Navy SEAL to Night Stalker pilot represented more than just a career change. It exemplified the evolution of modern special operations toward capabilities that could address threats existing at the edge of what was technically possible. Her story became a classified legend within special operations communities, inspiring future generations of operators who would push the boundaries even further. The helicopter engines faded into the distance as another impossible mission began, carrying America's elite warriors toward objectives that didn't officially exist, guided by pilots who had learned to make the impossible merely improbable. In the dangerous shadows where national security was protected by people willing to attempt the undoable, Chief Warrant Officer Hailey Grant had found her home. Stories like this take weeks of preparation, writing, and narration to bring you the most engaging and authentic content possible. If you've been captivated by Hailey Grant's transformation from Navy SEAL to elite Night Stalker pilot, I'd be incredibly grateful if you'd show your support by hitting that like button. sharing this story with friends who appreciate detailed military fiction, and subscribing to the channel for more epic stories like this one. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest releases. We have more incredible stories planned that will take you deep into the worlds of special operations, aviation, and the extraordinary individuals who dedicate their lives to protecting our freedom. Your support makes it possible for us to continue creating these immersive novel-length stories that transport you into worlds of courage, innovation, and heroism. Thank you for being part of this community of storytelling enthusiasts. Until our next adventure together, stay curious, stay engaged, and remember that the most incredible stories are often the ones that push the boundaries of what we thought was possible.